would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whiteline. I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to Wednesday, everyone. You're halfway there. Next week's going to be an interesting week for me. I'm going to be taking some time to go off and have some fun with my sons. My oldest boy is going to be going off to college, so it might be the last time I get to sort of have them all together. So we're going to do something special next week. I will be working to try and make sure there's shows for each day of the week. If I am unfortunate enough to not be able to get one for every day, I apologize for any missing days next week. It's been a busy week, folks. Now, the best way to get in contact with me, as most of you know by now, is to head over to the website at therebelbroker.com. Click on the contact link in the menu bar. Feel free to send along any ideas, suggestions, or observations that you might have. For those of you who are just finding the show, you couldn't have picked a better time to introduce yourself to Real Estate Realities with me, the Rebel Broker, because we are about to do a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, sadly, you missed the other 4 or 5 opportunities that we've done over the past few months to get that $50 gift card, but we're going to be doing it again. The drawing is going to be this Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific. And in order to qualify, get your name into the hat for the drawing, you simply need to go over to therebelbroker.com, click on the big red button at the top of the show titled Take the Survey to support the show. Provide the same email address both times you are asked, answer a few demographic questions, and you are all set. Once the drawing is done, make sure you use a correct email address because the way I'll reach out to you is via email. Verify that the email address actually leads to a real person, and then via email, I'll be sending you that Amazon gift card. So congratulations to the folks who've won over the last few months, totaling, I think, $250, $300 so far, and good luck to the folks who are going to be registering between now and Friday. I wanted to, like I often do, I like to offer up real-life experience whenever I can. And for those of you who've been listening for a really long time, you know that I occasionally will go off onto a kind of a rant, I guess, about really getting into understanding what your own strengths and weaknesses are. It was back. I usually try to do something like that right around the end of the year, beginning of the year, when it's time to reassess where you're at, review the goals you had for the year, see how far you made it, see how far you want to try to push it in the following year. And mixed in with that is understanding what you are good at and what you stink at. So many of these folks that want to try to give you advice, right, on how to achieve your goals, to really talk about you focusing on your strengths. And while that's great, I think it really ignores being self-aware enough and honest with yourself enough to recognize these are things that hold me back. And in some ways, it's simply the over-application of a good thing, right? Now, if there's one thing I've proven to you, if you've been listening to this show for a while, I like to analyze things. I like to try to look around and see what I'm noticing that's contradicting one another, try to figure out why that contradiction exists, point that out to you, try to tease out data that is as unbiased as possible, and try to form some opinions on where things might go, where things are, so that we can make better decisions, right? Well, and that's all well and good, and I feel like I apply those skills very well when it comes to my clients. When it comes to my buyers and sellers, I do the same kind of thing. I'll analyze what's going on. I always back up my decisions with data when it comes to what should you sell your house for, what should you pay for this house, those types of things, so that everybody's calibrated. In my own personal life, I tend to I tend to be the kind of person that can suffer from the paralysis of analysis, where I just feel like I could make a better decision if I could just get that one more piece of information. And as a result, first, the good thing is I recognize that I do that for myself. It's not a problem when I apply that skill to others. It's a problem when I apply the skill to myself. But it's good that I've been honest enough to identify it, because I found myself second guessing decisions relating to what I've been doing with the remodel of my home. And over the weekend, over the last couple of days, I sort of came to the realization that I needed to stop. I've analyzed enough. I understand what works and what doesn't work. I'm in the unique position of having seen hundreds more homes than the typical person out there who's doing the same thing. Robert, stop it and just go with your decision. And luckily it didn't delay me. It didn't put things off. But to be honest, it was kind of a freeing moment when I finally recognized, you know what, if you were dealing with someone other than yourself, take the circumstances that you're currently in. And if this was one of your clients, what would you be doing right now? And I'd be encouraging them to stop delaying and commit and stay on their schedule. Because in this particular case, if that little voice of doubt or whatever it is that pipes up in the back of my head that inspires me to do more analysis wins, I'm going to lose. Because the truth is, the facts are, I know when the peak time is to sell the property. I know the right time. I've got enough data that I feel very comfortable that even if I'm wrong by a week or even a month, I'm still in a position to take advantage of the peak time. I just may have to stay on the market a little bit longer. But the bottom line is I need to be there. And if I don't make my decisions, then I'm not going to be there. I won't be ready. So don't let that happen to you. And there's all kinds of reasons. In addition to you miss a window of opportunity, it costs you money and holding costs. It delays you. It feeds doubt in the future decisions you're going to make moving forward. So there comes a point when you got to just pitch it and go. And I realize this might not be a problem for everyone, but I do notice that it tends to be a common theme with investors I work with that aren't as seasoned as some other investors. And despite the fact I've done this tons, I've been involved in investments in the past. One or two that have just been mine, but a whole ton where it was more of a team thing and there were other folks, and usually it was other people's money involved. It was just one of those things where when it all is on you, there's a new level of doubt that I think that comes in, and you really need to put that aside and calibrate yourself to what is a reasonable amount of preparation for the decisions that you're making. That could be a moving target for some folks, what feels reasonable. I know when I was fooling myself into thinking more analysis was going to foster a better decision, that wasn't true. The truth was I had the data I needed to make the right call. Just do it and go. And luckily I figured it out in time that it didn't delay anything. So everything's good. But I wanted to share that with you because it was sort of a light turning on moment for me. And I know there's plenty of you out there who are probably in the same boat. Okay, we've got a few interesting ones to cover today. It's interesting how the most recent shows I've been doing really tend to be several smaller story items, but this one's kind of interesting, and there's a couple of different things to take from it. One, this one comes to Zero Hedge, and it's sort of an analysis of migration, what people have been doing. We talk about that frequently here to try to figure out areas that make sense to pay attention to, areas that maybe you were paying attention to that don't make sense to pay attention to because they're seeing a drop in population. And if there's one thing that either feeds or hurts a real estate market, it is the number of folks net that are either coming into or leaving that community. The more people that are leaving, obviously, the less demand there is for housing, which would affect folks who are renting. It would affect folks who are flipping, or you're buying land and building. It affects all of those folks in the same way, in that there's just not as much demand. Lower demand, prices tend to falter. The number of people leaving the region of New Jersey, Connecticut, Lower Hudson Valley, and Long Island in 1 year swelled from 187,000 in 2015 to 223,423 in 2016. What's also interesting is the biggest losers. I wanted to go what the biggest losers and biggest winners were from 2010 to 2016. Now, we talked about this, I think, with a different time frame, but I thought this was kind of an interesting one to look at. New York is number one in terms of the biggest losses, with a net loss of 902,616 from 2010 to 2016. Number two is Chicago with 409,167 net loss. Number three is Los Angeles with a net loss of 372,990. Number four is Detroit with 130,532 people lost in net population. And number five, Philadelphia with a loss of 127,868 folks. Now, again, these are numbers relating to larger areas. So it's going to also be a calculation of you figuring out if you own in these areas, how does this potentially affect the rents that you're going to be able to collect? If you're budgeting on increases, maybe that math needs to change. So reevaluate, figure out what makes sense to you. But as of course, since we've talked about some specific areas in Los Angeles, we know that this is also a little bit more sub-market focused than this. While it may be true that the net loss in Los Angeles and the greater Los Angeles area is 372,990, we know that there are some areas where real estate is booming. So it's not always something that you can apply to the entire region. You need to really look at your local markets. And of course, Detroit, we know there's a lot of problems there, but Detroit was also on our list of top places for investment in terms of return on investment. If you bought a property 1 year ago, we discussed this last week. If you bought a property 1 year ago in Detroit and you were renting it now, you were in the top 10 in terms of communities where you were making money. But also Detroit was number 2 in terms of the number of folks that had left over the time period that particular report was covering, when that was something like 14,000, I think, in the course of 1 year. Whereas, was it Chicago was number 1 in terms of loss, I think, with 66,000. Anyway, so those are all things I think you want to keep into track. Now let's talk a little bit about the biggest gains from 2010 to 2016. Now the Dallas-Fort Worth area is number 1 with 304,468 folks. Houston, Texas. It's amazing how much representation there is on Texas here, with 283,239 net increase in population over that 6-year period of time. Number 3, Phoenix. And remember, Phoenix was not only an area that showed up a lot in return on investment for us, the city of Phoenix itself, but also the cities around, directly bordering Phoenix. We talked about communities that were, in my head, I can see the map when we were talking about that region. And there was a community to the south, a community to the southeast, and a community to the northeast that all were in that top 10. So it wasn't even a fair fight. When you were looking at those top 10s, it was Phoenix itself plus these 3 or 4 other communities that really are all part of the greater Phoenix area, which is one reason why when that report came out, and we were talking about that last year, Phoenix was really towards the top of the list of places I was suggesting folks check out. Right along with places like, this was at the same time we were talking about Sacramento, California as being up there. Next on the list, number 4, Austin, Texas, 192,375 folks added to the rolls in 6 years. And number 5, Denver at 154,847. What was also interesting with this data, and again, this is all stuff I encourage you to review for yourself. I will include links to all of the stories that I discuss in today's show in the show notes, and you'll be able to find those at therebelbroker.com. Another thing that was interesting here is data we like to track, and that is the percentage of people in areas that want to get the heck out of those areas. And it tends to be areas like the San Francisco Bay Area, simply because I still get an awful lot of folks where I'll have reasonable discussions about the desirability of being an investor in real estate in Silicon Valley. And I'll get folks saying, hey, my real estate's been performing great for me. I bought it whenever they bought it. And that's usually more than 2 or 3 years ago. And I'll sell, yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Would you buy a house on your street today? And, we get into it and we talk a little bit and we decide, maybe that's not the way to go. You probably would not make as much on an investment if you tried to make it right now. And something else that you might want to figure in when you're calculating how desirable an investment is for you and whether or not a long-term investment strategy is the way to go, in other words, buy and hold, is how much do people want to be there? According to a new poll conducted by the Bay Area Council, 40% of all people living in San Francisco, all of them, say they're ready to ditch the city for greener pastures, while the number is even higher among millennials. And remember, millennials are supposed to be that savior group of buyers. 46% of millennials are looking for the exit in terms of San Francisco. Let's see. What's this a quote? This is a quote actually from the report. Quote, a growing number of Bay Area residents led by millennials. And remember, the last time we talked about this number, I think it was actually a little bit lower than this. I think it was it 39% or 38%? So it's gone up a little bit. A growing number of Bay Area residents led by millennials 18 to 39 are looking to greener or less expensive pastures as the region's housing and traffic crises combined with an astronomical cost of living take their toll, according to the results of the 2017 Bay Area Council poll released today. And then we went ahead and we talked about those numbers. They go on to say, losing our youth is a very bad economic and social strategy, according to the president and CEO of the Bay Area Council. They went on to say, but until we get serious about building the housing we need, we're going to continue seeing our region drained of the young and diverse talent. This has helped make the Bay Area an economic powerhouse. We know what the solutions are: streamline local approval and reduce fees and regulatory costs. We just need the political will here and in Sacramento to make them happen. It can be done. It must be done. And we're working now to get it done. So that is kind of amazing. That is one of the most public statements that agrees with what we've talked about here. It's the inventory, stupid. That's what needs to be fixed. It's not giving more money to buyers or making it easier for buyers to borrow. It's all about inventory. And I love the fact that a very well-known public group like the Bay Area Council is saying these kinds of things. It's encouraging to hear that. It's a little bit of a threat maybe to if it actually starts to happen, because despite the fact they're saying this and despite the fact that we're going to get work done, there's nothing that I've heard about that's currently happening that indicates that that any of these things are actually going to get dealt with. Now, we've got some other interesting data we're going to cover today, but we're going to save that for right after this break. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right. Aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's more interesting data day here on Real Estate Realities. The next thing I wanted to hit is construction spending. Now, let's roll this in with all the other things we've talked about, because we've talked about how there's actually some encouraging data relating to what's happening with construction. Or how construction might be affected. Confidence numbers are up. We also talked about how that could be a double-edged sword. We've talked a lot about the debt portfolio of the average person and how much really bad debt there is floating around out there. Remember, we talked about how student loans have now eclipsed the housing bubble. That was $1.3 trillion. This is what the student loan situation is $1.31 trillion. We've talked about the car loan issues that are currently happening. We've also talked about how most recent numbers show that car sales are actually down. That might be encouraging. It might mean that willingness to take on more debt and buying a car has gone down a little bit. But then we also talked the other day about the millennials that, remember, the savior buyers that are supposed to come and make the real estate market wonderful, are now taking on HELOC loans in their properties. They're taking on more debt. That's a concern. By constantly keeping yourself right up against the maximum that you can borrow on your property, you simply are making that margin that you can accept in a downturn very focused. Meaning if things go bad and property values drop down that 20%, then a huge number of people, because they've leveraged it off their HELOCs and kept themselves bumped right up against that 80%, in terms of how much equity they've pulled out of their properties, find themselves right there. So it affects a much larger number of people. But the good news, and we talked about how this is the second month in a row, actually, where we've seen good numbers relating to confidence with builders. And not only confidence with builders, remember, we've always tried to say, here is the confidence level that builders are saying they have, and here's the actions they're taking. And we've seen many times over the past couple of years where those two things did not match. We didn't see increases in permits, but we've seen increases in permits recently. We didn't see increases in billable hours for architects, but we have seen increases in billable hours for architects. We didn't see increased sales of lumber, but we have been seeing increased sales of numbers. So the good news is it actually looks like action is being taken on the part of builders to build. And we also talked about some of my anecdotal evidence locally that we were seeing more homes at a more reasonable price than we were seeing earlier in about middle of last year up to the end of last year, where those numbers were way up there at the top, where all the homes that were currently for sale that were new construction were all over $1 million. Now I'm seeing ones that are high 600, 700, 800, which is and the largest physical number of them, if you don't count just developments, right? Because all of these more affordable ones are in one development, and there's 8 of them. In the other developments, there are only 1, 2, or 3 homes available. So in terms of total volume of homes available in the specific communities I'm talking about, Morgan Hill, San Martin, Gilroy, prices were reasonable, or at least in the ballpark of reasonable. So all good things. Now, construction spending during February was estimated at a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 0.8% above the revised January estimate. So we actually did better than projected. It's 3% above the February 2016 estimate. Spending on private construction was at seasonally adjusted annual rate of 0.8% above the revised January estimate. The estimated seasonal adjusted annual rate of public construction spending was 0.6% above the revised January estimate. And if you look at the graph of this, and I will post to Pinterest this graph, everything's going pretty well. Residential is up there. Residential has been seeing a pretty good level of growth really since right around the last quarter of last year, but with a really big uptick in the first quarter of this year. So good numbers in terms of residential. Non-residential has flattened out, and public in general has actually declined since 2009. So it's good that we're seeing that. But again, when you see this chart and you see it compared to the past, you'll see that we're nowhere near the peak, but this goes all the way back to 1993, and it's a much healthier number. So we'll see how these things pan out. But these are all things I think that are worth being optimistic about. And I haven't been able to say that in a really long time. I can't really remember a time period. Now, I mentioned that this was good news when we first talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but the more data that comes out tends to reinforce that this is real, that we are likely to actually see more things being constructed. It's going to be interesting to see how this affects local marketplaces. Now, for me, I'm not seeing as much locally happening in this push. These are national numbers. So this should inspire you to assess what's going on in your local market. And particularly for my folks who already own properties in different marketplaces and want to figure out if there are going to be enough new properties put on the market that suddenly some of your renters may become buyers. And if that starts to happen, you may want to think about tenant retention. What could you do to keep your really good tenants? Or if you feel like your rental market is strong enough and you'll be able to survive someone moving out who potentially wants to buy, just factor that into your marketing and understanding your local marketplace to understand where that new rental rate might be. You may have to take either a flat, and you may not be able to boost that rent to the next tenant, or depending on how different the situation is, to be competitive, you may actually have to drop your rent by a little bit. In a lot of these markets, particularly mine, my advice is to not plan on as much rental increase. There was another article out today talking about how some of the biggest names in real estate that estimate this stuff are saying that they think we've hit peak rent. And if that's the case, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means that you need to budget for that. You need to stop being the buyer who budgets for some ridiculous growth rate in your rent over the coming months, quarters, and years. It also may be something that indicates you as an investor might want to shift your strategy. Maybe it's time to not be a buy and hold person. Maybe it's time to become that buy and flip person where you buy a property, improve it, and sell it off and enjoy the benefits of the enhancements you've made to that property. So it's an opportunity for you to potentially pivot in terms of what strategy is going to work best for you in the market you find yourself in. Finally, today, I wanted to talk about a new poll that is showing a big turnaround in how Americans view the economy. Now, we've already talked about general confidence numbers, but the first time since the economic crisis, Americans are more positive than negative about the economy in general. So we've seen now from a couple of different sources reporting this general confidence number. 58% of Americans said that the current economic situation is very or somewhat good. 40% said it's bad. At this time last year, only 44% of Americans described the economy as good, while 54% said it was in bad shape. So this is sort of reinforcing what we've been hearing from other sources relating to how people feel about everything. And as we mentioned earlier in the show, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. That kind of confidence can often mean a willingness to take on more debt or to spend money or to take that leap into buying property. And given what we've already talked about in terms of what's going on with debt, that might not actually be a great thing. Again, all the data will be presented in the show notes for today's show, links to all the articles. So feel free to take a look, see if you agree with me. Maybe you feel like I'm totally off base in terms of the conclusions I'm coming through from some of this data, and I'm happy to hear about that. And as always, the best way to give me that feedback is at the website at therebelbroker.com. Just click on contact and send along whatever you're thinking. All right, folks. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to spend some time with me to discuss these pretty interesting real estate topics. Hopefully I've given you something interesting to think about, or maybe even just consider in terms of you recalibrating yourself to your real estate investments, or even making some of those first steps towards buying your first investment property. Thanks again for listening, everybody, and I'll talk to y'all next time.